Well, welcome back to our second installment this week. We spent our previous session talking about how the practice issue that you're working on drives the design of your DMP project. And then in turn, the design of your DMP project gives you an architecture to build on and how to report your findings using standard reporting guidelines. You can find them on the Equator overall website, or you can select the reporting guideline that's specific to your design if you know what design type you're using. So we're going to take that information and pivot slightly to talk about making a plan for the authorship of your DMP manuscript. In many ways, authorship is very much related to ethics. Just like we want to ethically protect the patients and the populations that we engage with in our work, we want to be ethically engaged with our collaborators on the project. And so, just like with the reporting guidelines, you're not left alone to figure these things out on your own. There are some well-established ethical writing guidelines from the ICMJE that have been developed and are well-established as a norm in the biomedical sciences writing. So let's take a look at these specific ethical components of authorship, because that will help you to decide who's an author on your DMP manuscript when you submit it to conferences, when you submit it for publication, and it makes these discussions much, much easier to have. So if you follow the link in the course reading to the ICMJE guidelines, they give you 4 essential criteria for who is an author. So first is that they're making substantial contributions to the conception or design of the work. So they're a thinking component to helping you craft this project, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of the data. So if you have somebody who helps you extract data from medical records, that would be someone who may qualify as an author. If you work with somebody to help you design the analysis method, that person also would qualify as an author. If you work with your team to create the design of your project, if your clinical partner and your DMP chair and faculty members to figure out what the nature of your work is, that's all the conceptualization of your DMP project. So those people would qualify as authors. Secondly, you do the work, but then you create a written or an audiovisual summary of that work in a poster or a keynote address. So anybody who helps you draft that manuscript or present it, to think about the design, that person also would qualify as an author. They need to approve the version of what you're publishing, either the abstract that you're submitting or the manuscript that you're putting in for publication. And that person also has to agree to be accountable for all aspects of the work. So they're signing on saying, I agree with this, I buy in, I've contributed. So these key components help you think about, should this person be an author? Or is it somebody who helped me, perhaps somebody at the practice partner site who facilitated relationships or helped get your project launched? That person may be recognized for their contribution, but they might not meet these 4 criteria for authorship. So that's really the first big question. Did this person fulfill one or more of the ICMJE criteria for authorship? Then, when you're working with your author team, your DMP project team, the credit grid is a commonly used method for attributing the function or the role that the person played on the writing or the creation of the project team. And these are the credit criterion. You have the conceptualization of the idea, data curation or the data quality assurance and management, the statistical analysis or the qualitative analysis of the data, obtaining funding and financial support, actually conducting the research, so maybe doing the chart reviews, conducting the interviews or the focus groups, the methodology, designing how the project will happen, project administration where they oversee the rollout or operations, helping you with the resources, the study materials, samples, instrumentation, working with the software, giving supervision or oversight, validation of your tool. Perhaps if you're doing that, it's not quite as common in DMP projects, but perhaps working on the visualization, the presentation of the data in project presentations, in your slides, your graphics, writing up the results, and then reviewing and editing those results. So those are some key functions that happen across the life cycle of your project, from the very seed of the idea when you're creating it to the final version where you're ready to click submit on that manuscript and put it out for publication. All of these functions are things that you need to discuss explicitly with your team, with the practice partner, with yourself, with your faculty chair and your other faculty members, or any others that you bring into your team, perhaps as subject matter experts, so that everybody can have a shared vision of the project and know, here's what I'm going to contribute to this project, and I will be acknowledged with an acknowledgement statement, or I will be an author with this team, and here's the order of authorship. We'll get to order in a moment. So Emory's Authorship Activities Grid helps you to proactively plan for authorship when you're in the first design stages of your project. And the way this grid works, it's based on the credit method and ICMJE guidelines. And you essentially list the authors or contributors across the top, and then you identify the roles or functions that they play here. And you can put in perhaps things like who's the primary lead for this section. If you are working closely with a practice partner to design the DMP project, as you should be with your three-way partnership, the conceptualization, the primary conceptualization might be yours, but there might be a very close second shared effort here between the practice partner and the DMP chair, for example. And then when you create the methods, how are you going to do this work that you've conceptualized? Who's going to help you pick the project design or the study design? Again, you can list them in sort of descending order of contribution. And you can go across all of these activities. And in summary, all of those activities then contribute to help you, one, have a discussion with your team to decide who's going to do what, starting on day one, very much in advance of submitting this manuscript for publication. You'll have had these discussions. And certainly early in the Project 4 course, if these are discussions that you haven't had or haven't had recently with your team. So once you decide what roles every person is going to play, then you need to think about the authorship order, the author attribution. And the sooner you do this, the better, because oftentimes this can be political and charged. And so by having this concrete grid to guide the discussion, it can help depoliticize some of those conversations. Because essentially, in most biomedical research and publication fields, the first author is the primary author, the lead author, the corresponding author. So this would be you as the practice scholar, the person who has the A to Z view of the DMP project and a write-up. The last author is the senior author, or the advising or overseeing author, the person who helps you from A to Z to conceptualize the project, to implement it, to roll it out, to do quality assurance, to help you with analysis. Most times, this is the DMP chair, the faculty chair. It doesn't have to be always, but oftentimes the last author is that person who's your key go-to for designing, operationalizing, and analyzing the DMP project. So those are the two key spots that you need to think about. Who's functioning as the senior or overseeing author, who's functioning as the primary or corresponding author, based on those rules of thumb. By default, you're the first author, and your chair is the last author. But you can certainly modify that with discussions in your team so that everybody owns the final decision and proposal. And then the authors between the first and the last position are usually then listed in descending order of their contribution. So if, for example, your practice partner is is your right-hand person in designing, rolling out, collecting your data. They might be your second author. And then if you work with somebody to give you guidance on the qualitative analytics, because your DNP team doesn't have that expertise, maybe they're going to be your third author, and perhaps another DNP team member would be your fourth author, followed by your project chair, who oversaw and led the entire process. So that's how this grid works. Then this listing of authors is something that needs to be explicit in your discussion, not only the function and activity, but also the listing, so that you can make a proposal on day one of your project, and you can revisit this periodically to make sure it still is in sync with people's actual contributions and ethical listing of them as authors and contributors. So certainly this is a great opportunity to update your authorship activities and the listing if you haven't done so already, and to have those discussions with your DNP team and any potential consultants, subject matter experts, or analysts that you've worked with, so there can be a clear understanding of authorship before you get to the journal submission stage.